I realized I had had so much sex. I had watched so much porn. I had eaten so much good food. I've gotten kind of everything I've wanted, and I'm not happy. So a great question to ask is like, to what end? Like, okay, I want to watch porn. It's going to bring me pleasure, but to what end? Like, what am I foreseeing is the end goal here? Do I really think when I finish watching porn that I'm going to feel deeply fulfilled and a state of kind of happiness and content with my life? There's this one realm called the realm of the hungry ghosts. And they have these huge, massive bellies. And they have tiny little mouths. So they wander around and their mouths are so small that they can never eat enough to satisfy their giant hunger. That is what addiction feels like. It's like, I'm hungry and I can never satisfy that itch, never satisfy that craving. No matter how much I stuff in my face, no matter how many drugs and how much porn, I still feel hungry and I'm miserable.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lipkowitz, and with over 12 years of meditation experience as a mindfulness trainer and coach for high performers, I've become obsessed with helping people break free from compulsive, unhealthy behaviors and addictions and step into a life of true freedom so that they can finally become their best selves and cultivate deeper and lasting fulfillment. I've created Unhooked, the Breaking Porn Addiction podcast, to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to master your mind and optimize your life. This is Unhooked. So hey friends, welcome back to Unhooked. Today's episode is a special one. It's a conversation that originally aired on the George Peterson podcast, and I'm grateful to George for allowing us to share it here. In this episode, we dive deep into my own personal story of addiction and recovery, from childhood coping mechanisms to the search for true inner freedom. We explore the psychology and neuroscience of porn addiction, the role of trauma in compulsive behaviors, the Buddhist concept of the hungry ghost and how it relates to craving, how to break free from shame and rewire your brain, and why cultivating equanimity is key to lasting change and emotional resilience. Before we dive into the content, just a friendly reminder that if you're interested in getting support in your journey of recovery and want to join a community of like-minded men, reach out to me about the Unhooked Academy group coaching program so you can learn more. And now, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with George Peterson.
All right, Jeremy, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, really grateful to have you on the show. And it was nice getting to chit-chat for a few moments in the beginning, getting to know you a little better. And I'd love to just have you start by taking us all the way back to the beginning and describing what it was like growing up as Jeremy.
That's an interesting question. Well, I grew up in California, near Santa Cruz. I guess I was born near San Francisco, then moved to Santa Cruz. My life, I guess I've always been a bit more of a introverted, quiet, kind of attentive person, likes to pay attention to what's going on around me. My childhood was actually pretty good. I got to run around in Santa Cruz, had kind of minor traumas that all children have. No childhood is perfect. I had things that weren't perfect and needs that didn't get met and got teased and bullied and all these different things. Overall, it was a pretty good childhood, but I did notice myself kind of reaching out towards, we'll talk a lot about addiction on this episode, I'm guessing, but reaching out towards kind of things that made me feel good behind closed doors. And so self-pleasure and masturbation, pornography, things like that, junk food, sugar, those definitely kind of reached me at an early age, 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old. I started self-soothing with things. I guess just a high-level overview of what it was like to be me as a kid. Pretty good childhood, but, using some of these pleasure things in our society to self-medicate at an early age.
Yeah, I like how you talked about like the little things that, whether it was bullying or the little trauma that you had, because I think that sometimes we think it's like, I heard it labeled as like big T, small T trauma. And like,
Hmm.
I think a lot of times we just associate the word trauma with those, I guess you could say like big T
Hmm.
events. And, where it's like the little T events make just as much of an impact on us and can continue to determine how we're showing up in the moment of our life as we get older, just like the big T trauma can do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's something that I think is so important for us to normalize and talk about, that you don't have to have some big T trauma event that happened in your life in order to kind of have gotten yourself into some unhealthy coping mechanisms. You don't have to have some major sexual assault or some, person close to you that died. It can just be all the little ways that your needs weren't met as a kid, that you needed to find your safety and find refuge elsewhere. And that can also cause us to reach out to some unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Yeah, I mean, most people grew up in, I don't actually know anybody who didn't grow up in a household where the parents argued, and like children are sensitive and they don't know how to process those big feelings, and then I know for me, like one thing I've done a little studying on lately is how ADHD is actually a trauma response. And like
Mm,
when you're in a home, for say where there's arguing or there's that fear, maybe your parents might get divorced, whatever it is, there's those big feelings that can be uncomfortable. You're in this small body and you don't know how to process and release them. Then sometimes because we can't run because we have nowhere to go, right? And we can't fight back because they're our parents and they're bigger than us. And so we start to tune out, right? And then that gets labeled as ADHD.
mm,
And it's like a way to cope. It's a way to escape, tune out from those big feelings we're having.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, anything can be a reason for us to act out, whether it manifests as ADHD or addiction. Um, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, you're you're growing up, you're in this household, there's some little trauma, and then you start acting out. So sort of when did you start to realize that maybe the acting out, whether it was like you were saying, maybe through pornography or, any of the behaviors you started to mention, when did you notice those things starting to become a problem for you?
I would say I didn't notice it until decades later. And that's one of the issues with some of these habits and behaviors that might be more normalized in our society, things like sugar addiction or porn or video games. These are all things that can be kind of normalized. We don't really necessarily see it as a huge problem. And it also builds up slowly over time, these unhealthy dynamics and unhealthy relationships. So for me, I didn't notice it at all. It was something I started looking at porn, when I was 9 or 10 years old. I started using sugar and sweets to self-soothe that early as well. And they just slowly build into your life over time. And so I didn't notice really anything was wrong with those until much, much later. I didn't realize the effect that they were having on my life. Particularly porn is a big topic that I talk about a lot because I think a lot of guys struggle with it and we don't talk about it enough because it's this sensitive, shameful issue. It wasn't until I was graduating from university that I had some moments that shone a light on that behavior and made me realize how it was impacting my life, my relationships, my happiness, my mental health, my self-esteem. So that was really when I was around maybe 20, 21 years old when I started to notice, hey, this is actually having an impact on me. It's not just a harmless behavior that's affecting no one. This is actually impacting my sense of happiness, my sense of well-being.
Yeah, because you went to school, right, for genetics at Duke. Am I right about that?
So I went to undergrad at UC Davis, University of California at Davis, and then I ended up going to grad school for a PhD program at Duke.
Yeah. And so what were some of those things in school that you started noticing where you did start to recognize that, these things were becoming a problem?
Yeah. The main thing, and I'll just talk, we could go down different rabbit holes. We could talk about sugar addiction or video games, but I'll just talk about porn because for me, it was the big one. It was the
Yeah.
one that really opened my eyes. So what I started to notice was how kind of the first thing that really broke was just how much my mind was out of control. It was not in my control, that I was in some ways enslaved to lust and desire and sexual craving. That I would go to a cafe, hoping to sit down with a textbook and study, and my eyes would just keep checking out women that were walking into the cafe. I was constantly thirsty and hungry for sexual stimulation. And I started to realize that my mind had gotten out of control. It was just on autopilot, this hungry ghost. I mean, we talk in Buddhism about the concept of the realm of the hungry ghost, where you just wander this existence hungry for more and never satisfied with what you have. And so I kind of started to notice that I was always wandering around being enslaved by this desire for more sexual stimulation, whether it was just checking girls out, whether it was wanting to act out with porn and to masturbate or to go have sex. It was something that was controlling a lot of my life and a lot of my actions and causing me to do things that I later regretted, causing me to get in relationships that I regretted in order just to have sex, causing me to lose sleep, stay up late. So that
Mm.
was one of the things, just realizing my mind was out of control. But also the way that porn was impacting my intimacy with my partners, the ways it was warping my expectations of what my partner should look like, what they should be doing during sex, the way I was becoming more perfectionistic, kind of judging people to these standards of what I was seeing in porn and kind of expecting my partners to be perfect in that way. So it was just creating all these unrealistic, unhealthy expectations. And then kind of the final thing was just realizing, I had this moment of realizing that lust itself was a state of suffering. And this was a really deep insight for me, was realizing that when you are wanting something that you can't have and you feel like you need to have that thing in order to be happy, then it doesn't matter what's going well in your life, how much good you're having. Because I had a pretty good life. I was a good student, had a lot of friends, was healthy, but I wasn't happy. I was miserable because I was always focused on getting what I didn't have. And I realized that if I didn't address this issue with my porn addiction, I would never be happy because that was kind of the underlying thread of my life, was always looking at what I didn't have and what I wanted. And it was a state of emptiness.
Yeah, no, I like that, the realm of the hungry ghost that you mentioned.
Mm,
Yeah, I'd love to explore that more with you. I sort of reminds me of one of my meditation teachers when I first got sober was saying, he was talking about what he called object referral happiness, where he said, it's when you're in a state where your happiness is dependent upon people, places, circumstances, things outside of the self. And like the work
hmm
that we were doing was to get back to more of a state of self referral happiness, which is that internal state, independent of external circumstances. And I think that, it's interesting hearing you talk in some of the words with like lust, because I also know that like I'm sober from porn as well, to reorient some of my thinking around some of the words and like sort of the ideas about some of these things that I feel like we've been fed or conditioned and programmed to believe by society. Because there's also a big movement right now around like embracing more of our sexual energy, but
hmm
channeling it in a more healthy way. Right. And so, like, for me, like, have you ever heard of the practice sex magic?
No.
Yeah, so I got sober from heroin, and then I realized that, I was using porn similar to the way I was using drugs. And so I got sober from porn, and I went 5 years without watching porn and 18 months no masturbation, and I ended up watching porn again, long story short. And what I realized is like, when I got sober this time from drugs and alcohol, one of the biggest differences, I learned this practice called Vedic meditation that I now teach. And my experience is like the experience that comes from drugs and alcohol, I couldn't compete with the new experience I was having from having my daily meditation practice. And sort of in the same way, like I've had that experience this time around with sex magic, is like when I'm doing this practice and I'm like having more of a healthy relationship with my sexual energy, but not just completely like trying to avoid it, which is what I was trying to do during those first 5 years. So like sex magic is,
Mhm.
because, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. It's this idea that, look, your sexual energy is the most creative force on the planet, right? It creates a life, right? It's your sexual energy center, which is your creativity energy center. And so you can channel that creative energy in other ways, right? And so what you do is, for instance, during sex magic, you bring yourself to the point of like arousal, and then you start to draw that energy up through the energy centers or the chakras till you get to the crown chakra. And then you don't have to bring yourself to the point of orgasm, but you get yourself to the point of like a peak state, whether that's an orgasm or just a peak state. And then you visualize what it is that you want to manifest. And because it's like one of the most powerful creative forces on the planet, you can channel that energy into manifesting the life you want for yourself. And so, in my experience, like with porn, when I found a healthier way to be in relationship to my sexual energy, I noticed that the way it lived inside of me started to change. And I'd love to get your thoughts because it's sort of based on that idea of like when you change the way you're relating to something, the things you're looking at will start to change.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like sexual transmutation, using your sexual energy and transmuting and channeling that energy as a force for good. And these practices go back thousands of years to Taoist practices and sexual kung fu and all kinds of ways. But the fundamental concept there is exactly what you're saying, which is that your sexual energy is not the enemy. It's not a bad thing. It's actually one of the most beautiful things. And it's not about just repressing it or suppressing it or cutting it off, but it's being in a healthy relationship with it and using it in a healthy and skillful way. And that many guys find that when they're watching porn and kind of releasing their sexual energy into just numbing out with super normal stimulus of porn, it's not a skillful outlet. It's not a creative kind of use of that energy. And that there are these practices that you can do to channel that energy. Um, but that's a big part of recovery from sex and porn addiction is realizing that your sexual energy is not bad. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a pervert. And a deep part of recovery is learning how to cultivate a healthy relationship with it. How to embrace your sexuality and say, this is a beautiful part of me. How do I want to be in the world as a sexual being?
Mm.
And so for a lot of guys, that does require kind of letting go of some of these toxic inputs,
Mm.
you know, porn being, we could talk about whether it's entirely toxic, whether there are benefits to it. But a lot of guys realize it's too addictive. It's too unrealistic and it has all these negative consequences. And on the whole, it's not worth it. And it's better to channel that energy in a healthier way. So definitely like, what you're calling sexual magic, I think sounds a lot like different kinds of sexual transmutation practices.
Exactly. No, and I'm so glad you shared that because I just think it's so important that people realize that this sexual energy is not a bad part of themselves.
Hmm.
Like there are
Yeah.
no bad parts, like is what I believe. I did some IFS, internal family
Yeah.
systems, and
Hmm.
you have that book called No Bad Parts. And I
Yeah.
think that that's super important because, like you said, we want to change the way that we're in relationship to it. And I think that being like one of the biggest things.
Yeah. I think a little nuance to add there is to understand that there are no bad parts, but there are unskillful actions. And I think that's the balance we have to find is because some people can take that no bad parts too far
Mm.
and say, there's no bad parts and my sexual energy is a gift. So I'm just going to, life is short. Let me just indulge and just enjoy the moment. And let's,
Mm.
go do all the things I want to do and follow my bliss and follow my desire. And yes, there are no bad parts, but there's also realize that like our biology can get hijacked. Our
Mm.
evolutionary systems can get hijacked by corporations where there's billions of dollars behind these corporations that are trying to make things as addictive as possible. And it's not good enough to simply follow your desire, but sometimes you have to say, yeah, my body wants to do this, and that's not bad. There's no wrongness in the desire, but is it skillful to act on that desire?
Mm.
And sometimes restraint is called for. Sometimes saying, yeah, I would desire that and it would make me feel good, but it's actually not skillful. It would cause harm to someone or cause harm to myself. And actually, what is most skillful or onward leading in terms of deeper fulfillment. And this gets back to I forget the term you used, but kind of the object happiness thing you talked about. That happiness, for me, before I realized I had this problem with addiction, I thought things outside of me would make me happy. If I had more sex, more partners, more pleasure, more validation, more success, then I would be happy if I could just get those things. But part of the spiritual life, is realizing that happiness is an inside job, and it's about how you're showing up in the world. Are you grateful for what you have? Are you practicing contentment? Are you having compassion and empathy for others? Like, there's so many things inside of us that lead to happiness that we ignore because of our society, because of the porn industry, the sugar industry, the news media. That's all kind of pushing these things down our throats, saying this will make you happy. Buy this watch, it'll make you happy. That'll get you the sex appeal you desire, right? And it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, it's my meditation teacher. He just posted a picture on Instagram that was talking about like not labeling things as good or bad, but instead looking at them as helpful or unhelpful, or in your case, is this skillful or unskillful? Or he was saying like aligned or unaligned. No doubt, like
Yeah.
you said, like it's not, we're not labeling them as bad, but there are actions that are unaligned. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about just that idea that, look, we don't want to focus on the weeds in life, right? We want to try to put our attention on the roses because whatever we put our attention on grows. But at the same time, we don't want to ignore the roadkill. And like the reality is,
Hmm.
is like we're living inside of a world, as you're saying, where there's billions of dollars, right, that are aimed at keeping us distracted, and in a lot of ways, like stupid, sick, and slow. And I'd love for you to just touch on that a little bit more and how, that plays into those things as you were sort of alluding to people being addicted to sugar, being addicted to porn, or all the other things that can really easily keep us distracted.
Yeah. I mean, I like what you said, that we don't want to just focus on the flowers. Like, sometimes we have to look at kind of the weeds or look at the roadkill. And so much of our suffering in life comes from wanting to run away from what's unpleasant. Like, oh, sadness, I don't want that. Oh, stress, I don't want that. And we're running away from anything that's unpleasant bodily sensations, boredom, loneliness, back pain. It's like we always are running from unpleasant and grasping after what's pleasant. And that's what's fundamentally leading to so much of our suffering. Whereas there's a deeper inner peace available by learning how to be with what's unpleasant without running away from it, and learning how to be with what's pleasant without grasping after it.
Hmm.
It's like to see something that's really pleasant and we know it would give us a hit of dopamine or a hit of pleasure, but to not chase after it, to just say, oh, I really enjoyed that. Or that's beautiful, but I don't need to chase after it in this thirsty, craving kind of way. And the same with unpleasantness. It's like, oh, I'm bored. And that's okay. I don't need to fix this. I don't need to change this. I can just experience this boredom and let it be unpleasant. And so for me, it's like learning that concept, which again comes from these ancient meditation traditions. For me, Vipassana, insight meditation, was my path to finding freedom, which is really about this practice of being with what is,
Hmm.
not chasing after pleasure in this hungry, thirsty, hungry ghost kind of way, and not running away from pain also in this frantic way, but having this state of equanimity where it's like, oh, okay, this is pleasant. I don't need to frantically chase after it. Or, oh, this is unpleasant. I don't need to run away from it. It's this grounded state of inner peace, inner calm that is there with what is, that isn't chasing after ecstatic bliss. And it's not running away from pain. It's saying, I can enjoy those things when they're here. And I love those things. And I prefer for pain to not be here, but I'm not enslaved to external conditions. One of the phrases that really speaks to me from Buddhist practice is unconditional freedom, which is freedom that is not based on external causes and conditions. It's unconditional. It doesn't matter if it's raining, if it's sunny, if somebody tells you they like you or they tell you they hate you, like you're free from the inside. That's kind of coming full circle. When I realized I had this porn addiction, one of the deep insights I had is realizing what I really wanted in life. And what I really wanted was inner fulfillment, inner freedom. And I think that's what a lot of us want.
Beautiful. And you said something there that just really stood out to me. You said a deeper peace is available by learning to be with what's unpleasant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so, and that's the thing, like, for me, this whole journey's been about learning to no longer addict and avoid and distract away from my discomfort, right? And the invitation is when the uncomfortable sensations arise to be able to learn to stay with them a moment longer. And you actually answered it, because I was thinking, I've learned my own ways of going about that, but I wanted to hear your ways, because I think somebody could hear that and be like, well, how the heck do I do that? You're like,
Mm-hmm.
by learning to be with reality or whatever's occurring without needing it to change. And it's like, yeah, but how? And you said Vipassana and the retreats you did were really what gave you the ability to do that. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's so, when you take it down to a granular level, it's so simple, which is whatever kind of meditation you're doing, whether you do Vipassana or insight meditation or Vedic meditation or whatever, it's like to make sure that when you're practicing these things, to look at the relationship you're having with your experience. Like, are you actually there for the experience and practicing acceptance? And it can be as simple as if you sit down to follow your breathing or to recite a mantra. And if it's not going the way you want, is there resistance? Are you kind of wishing it was other than it is? If you're following your in breath and your out breath, and your mind is wandering, are you judging that and saying, oh, my stupid mind, get focused, right? That's resistance. That's not equanimity. So the practice there is as simple as saying, oh, my mind is wandering. Okay, that's all right. Now let me start again. If you're reciting a mantra and you lose track of the mantra, then do you judge yourself? Stupid meditator, I'm always losing track of it. It's like, no, okay, I lost the mantra. Let me come back. And that is how we cultivate that quality of equanimity. So for me, my background is in the sciences. Like, I studied genetics, was working on a PhD in genetics and genomics. The science behind it is really important. So understanding what's going on a neurological level. So the neuroscience and neuroplasticity was pivotal for me understanding this and transforming my life. And one of the key concepts is neuroplasticity. And there's this one phrase that really changed everything for me, which is understanding that neurons that fire together wire together. What that means is that the more often you use a particular neural pathway, that neural pathway gets stronger. The synaptic connections get stronger. So if you're thinking constantly thoughts of anger or self-judgment, you're strengthening those neural pathways. You're creating grooves in the mind that make those thoughts easier. But conversely, if you intentionally cultivate thoughts of equanimity, like, oh, this is okay. It's unpleasant, but I'm okay with it. You're strengthening the neural pathways associated with equanimity, and you're just growing that muscle. So if somebody's saying, okay, I'd love to be at peace with the way things are, but how do I do it? You simply start small. You go to the gym. Like, if you want to build a big bicep, you go to the gym and you do that resistance training on that bicep. It's the same for mental traits. Like, if you want a particular quality of mind to pervade your life, you have to frequently think that type of thought and strengthen those neural pathways. And that's what meditation is. It's training in particular mental qualities. whether it's concentration, mindfulness, compassion. There's so many different kinds of meditation. But the one that, for addiction recovery is so important is this quality of equanimity. Like they're different, there's different kinds of meditations. Compassion meditation, they cultivate different things. But what I have found for myself, a lot of the people I work with, you have to have some component of cultivating equanimity, which is not being enslaved to pleasure or being enslaved to run away from pain, but learning how to be at peace with those things.
No, that's beautiful. And I love for you to maybe too, because the neuroscience stuff's so fascinating to
Mm.
explain, dive into that a little bit deeper if you want to talk a little bit more about the understanding from the neuroscience perspective of all this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, what we know, we used to think for the last 100 years was that your brain developed when you were a child in your preteen times, and then kind of your brain was developed. And once you got into adulthood, your brain didn't form new pathways. That's what people used to think. But over the last 20, 30, maybe even 40 years at this point, we really understand that the brain is plastic. It's constantly rewiring and forming new connections. And this is what we call neuroplasticity. And we can use that to our advantage. We can actually rewire the neural pathways of our mind so that if we have gotten stuck in some unhealthy autopilot behaviors, because a lot of addiction is being stuck on autopilot. It's the default habit pattern of the mind is, let me act out with this drug, let me act out with this substance, act out with this behavior, and it's autopilot. But we can actually rewire the mind to cultivate healthier default habit patterns. And that's what, this combination of neuroscience and meditation, of East and West, it's so beautiful because it's saying there's a science behind this, behind why this works. It's not just wishful thinking. For me, understanding what you're doing while you're doing it, like to not just take some meditation instruction and do it blindly, but to say, okay, what is this actually doing? And once you understand that, it gives you so much more fuel to practice it.
Mm.
If you can really understand, like, oh, when I sit down and I meditate, if I'm listening to a sound, what's really important is not just the listening, it's the relationship I have with the listening. Because that's the thing that I want to cultivate, is the relationship to the experience. It's not the experience itself. That's why it doesn't really matter whether you're doing a flame meditation, mantra meditation, mindful breathing, whatever. It's like, what's your relationship to what's happening? Are you paying attention to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the neuroscience stuff, I think I loved what you said about how it can be like a fuel for our practice,
Mm.
because I noticed that myself in the Vedic meditation training. On day 3 of the training, I talk all about stress, and our body's a perfect accountant, and trauma, and how it stores itself inside of the body, and how, one of the things in Vedic meditation that's happening is there's a mind-body connection. So as you learn how to deeply settle the mind in meditation, your body actually starts to receive a higher quality rest, which can go down into the body and start to release that stress that's stored inside of it, right? And there's a reason, right, we keep feeling stuck, and there's a reason we keep taking things personally. And there's a reason we can't see life's going down for us, not to us. We have that accumulated calcified stress in our nervous system. And meditation is a way of going in and laundering out that stress, right? And so it's not that we're going to forget about the stressful things in the past that have been keeping us stuck or how they made us feel. It's just they're not going to have that same negative emotional charge anymore. And so when people understand that, like you said, it's that fuel, right? That understanding that fuels their practice and inspires them to stay consistent with the practice. It reminds me of that like principle of like knowledge without experience is just an intellectual exercise, but experience without knowledge can also be like a bit confusing and scary. And so it's like, giving people, like you said, the knowledge, the understanding then helps to fuel their practice.
Yeah. You said it so perfectly, that experience without knowledge can be a bit scary and confusing. And it's sometimes we need some of these outside sources to just give us a little bit of a framework, like, okay, what am I looking at here? Yeah.
And so with the porn stuff, and actually, before we keep going with the porn stuff, I do want to ask you, because it's a big thing, the sugar thing,
Hmm.
right? Sort of how you realized that was a problem, and then what were the steps you started taking to change the trajectory you noticed you were on with sugar?
Yeah. So porn was the thing that was the first kind of crack in the armor. It was the thing that broke through and shined that light on my addictive behaviors. But then it just opened up the whole world when I started really reading about Buddhist philosophy and the nature of craving and suffering and attachment and all these things. It made me realize porn is just one manifestation of the addictive nature of the mind. And it's really the addiction to pleasure in all its different forms, whether it's pleasure through sugar, pleasure through sex, pleasure through porn, pleasure through external validation. This was a big thing for me as well. It's like I was a rock star student, obsessed with being the best student in all my classes. And I realized that was an addiction too. My happiness was dependent on being liked by other people. My happiness was dependent on somebody thinking I was a smart, intelligent person. It's really not about the substance or the behavior. It's all the same underlying dynamic. We're addicted to things that make us feel good, and we're addicted to running away from things that make us feel bad. And for me, everyone's going to be different. For some people, it's alcohol. Some people, it's heroin. For some people, it's, success and money and financial kind of like the number in their bank account. For me, one of the early ones was sugar. And that one, it's for some of these addictions where they're deeply ingrained, like in our society, it can be really a little bit harder to figure that out. Because with porn, I can just say, okay, I just don't want to engage with porn. I'm still going to cultivate a healthy sexuality, but I can say no to porn and that feels good for me. You can't necessarily say no to sugar, to carbs. I mean, you can, and you can go carnivore, you can go keto, um, but it's a different kind of question of how can I be in a healthy relationship and look at my compulsive nature around this. How am I using this to self-medicate?
I think one of the standout things you said there is like, we're addicted to things that make us feel good, and we're addicted to running away from things that don't make us feel good.
Mhm. I mean, that's what suffering is. It's like when we're running away from unpleasant, we're suffering. When we have this feeling of, if I just didn't have this knee pain, or if I just didn't have this awful person in my life, then I could be happy.
Mm.
That's a state of suffering, right? Conversely, if you're sitting there thinking, if I only had that cookie right now, if I'd only grabbed two instead of one, or if I could just have that girl who I saw on Instagram, then I could be happy. In that moment of thinking that, you separate yourself from happiness because you put your happiness in this thing that's somewhere else. And you say, once I have that, then I'll be happy. But it's a never ending, it's never truly satisfying. And that's where the realm of the hungry ghost, maybe I've used that analogy, maybe I could talk about what it is.
Yeah.
In Buddhist cosmology, there's these different realms of existence, and they're not really real places. They're kind of more manifestations of the mind. So the realms are like the heavenly realm where everything is pleasant all the time. There's the hell realm where everything is unpleasant and, fire and brimstone. There's the human realm, which we find ourselves in, which things are kind of in the middle. There's the animal realm where it's just a bunch of animals, And then there's this one realm called the realm of the hungry ghosts. And it's this realm of these ghost-like creatures that wander this realm, this existence, and they have these huge, massive bellies, these huge stomachs, and they have tiny little mouths. So they wander around and their mouths are so small that they can never eat enough to satisfy their
Mm,
giant hunger. So they live in this state of perpetual hunger, never able to satisfy their hunger.
that's
That
amazing.
is addiction. I mean, the Buddhists kind of nailed it, right? It's like that is what addiction feels like. It's like I'm hungry and I can never satisfy that itch, never satisfy that craving. No matter how much I stuff in my face, no matter how many drugs and how much porn, I still feel hungry and I'm miserable.
And no matter how much I try to self-soothe, my mouth's never going to be big enough. I'm never going to feel full.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is powerful stuff for sure. And I think what's important though is to note like some of these quote unquote behaviors, like even eating, right? It's like, which could become an addiction for somebody, isn't innately bad or there's nothing innately wrong, right? And so that's the thing is it's important to note that like, look, sometimes for whatever reason, these things that, innately are a part of us, become something that we use to self-soothe. But I really do think it all comes down to, like you're saying, this search for happiness, right? In the outer world, in the relative world. And really the only place that you can really locate true happiness is on the inside. True happiness, it doesn't live out here in the relative world. You talked about Realm of the Hungry Ghost. I'm pretty sure that's one of the names too of Dr. Gabor Mate's books.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like he talks about addiction being a response to trauma. And one of the questions that I love that he says is we shouldn't be asking why the addiction, but why the pain.
Hmm.
And it's like it's the pain inside that causes us to reach to self-soothe. And so I think that it's like too getting to the root, right? And healing that pain. And then we're not going to look, whether it's a good thing or a thing that innately is a part of us or not. We could just say we're less likely to reach for those things because the pain inside that was causing us to try to self soothe is no longer affecting us on that same level anymore.
Hmm. Yeah. I want to follow up, with that quote from Gabor Mate where he says, we shouldn't ask why the addiction, but why the pain. And then a little bit later, he says this really profound thing. He says, the addiction isn't your problem. The addiction is the attempt to solve the problem.
Mm.
And so realizing that whether it's like acting out with porn or the unhealthy relationship with sugar or heroin, it's like, yes, in some ways that is a problem that needs to be addressed, but also it's like, it's the attempt to solve the problem. It's your attempt to self-soothe, that there's some underlying trauma that or some void that you're trying to fill, some pain that you're trying to escape. And the addiction is the attempt to solve that pain.
It's so true. I mean, I I've spoken in a lot of different, like asked to be a keynote at a lot of different recovery groups. And one of the things I always say is addiction, right? The drugs, the alcohol, they weren't the problem. They were the solution to my problem.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. I mean, and hopefully, for the people listening to this, like the point of saying that is to humanize and to have compassion for the behavior and to say, hey, there's a reason why I was doing this. I was in pain. I was suffering. And there was a time in my life when this actually helped me feel safe. And it's gotten out of control. And now it's time for me to take ownership of it and say, hey, at this point in my life, it's causing harm. And I need to step up and make a change.
And I would actually even add to that, that not only was it helping me at one point deal with the pain that I was feeling, for me, I would argue that for some people, people like myself, like that addiction is what kept me alive.
Mm,
Like literally, not only wasn't the problem, it was literally the thing that was saving my life because I had
mm,
so much pain inside that if I didn't have the addiction to temporarily relieve some of that discomfort that I felt, I probably would have taken my life. Because
mm,
every time I thought about taking my own life, I'd just go and get high, right?
mhm,
Because it would take away that deep, deep, deep level sadness that I was feeling. And so eventually, like you said, like we kind of get to a place where we can't keep going on the way we're going anymore, right?
mhm,
And if we do, we're probably going to die or just our life's not going to get any better at all, or we're going to get some help. And I think at that point, you have to face it head on. But I think there is a point in time where you don't know any other solution. And it might even be the addiction might even be the thing that keeps you alive through that time because the pain's just so deep.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. And that's again why these practices around equanimity, for learning how to be with pain, so much of it comes down to that. Like, can I learn how to make space for my sadness without it dropping me into a deep despair? And that's the practice of equanimity. It's like, oh, making space for what's here. Can I make space for this emotional pain?
Yeah, my teacher said, she said, can my self love become so big that it can hold my self hatred?
Mm, yeah.
And so you talked a lot about, this journey into Buddhism that you've been on. And did I read it correctly too that you were a monk for a little while?
hmm Yeah, in Myanmar.
Yeah. Do you want to share a little bit about that journey of being a monk, how long you went
Sure.
through that
Yeah.
process, and then what inspired you to sort of leave that way of life?
Yeah. So the being a monk came much later in my meditation journey, came almost maybe 10 years after I had really started having a devoted meditation practice. And it wasn't the main kind of thing. It wasn't like the culmination of some grand desire, and it wasn't a long part of my life. It was more of I was going on a silent retreat, like a month long silent retreat, and I was doing it at this monastery in Myanmar, and had the opportunity to ordain as a monk while I was there doing this month long silent retreat. So I took the opportunity because temporary ordinations is something that they actually really value and promote in Myanmar. Um, but I would say, more my relationship with Buddhism has come through these retreats. Sometimes they're called Vipassana retreats. In the West, we call them insight meditation. There are silent retreats where you go and you practice a particular style of mindfulness, around kind of paying attention to what's happening. A lot of it's around equanimity. There's also some compassion practices. But these silent retreats are usually anywhere from 5 to 15 days. Typical one is around 10 days. And for me, when I realized I had an addiction, started reading about neuroscience and neuroplasticity, and found, some books on meditation. And I found this one book that really changed everything for me. It was a book called Happiness by Mathieu Ricard. He's a Tibetan Buddhist monk. And he has a background in science and in molecular biology. And so he kind of brought together Buddhist wisdom with modern neuroscience. And that really opened my eyes. And that led me down a path of getting interested in meditation. So I ended up traveling to India, started going on my first silent retreats. And it was in those retreats where I first experienced, what real peace and inner fulfillment was like. I started learning some of these practices around deep contentment with the way things are, like a deep well of inner fulfillment that was, again, unconditional. Because I had been raised to think that my happiness was in getting people to like me, having sense pleasure, good food, good sex, whatever. And then you're on one of these retreats where you're not talking, you're not reading, you're not writing, you're not making eye contact with the other participants. 10 days of no distractions, just being with yourself and your practice. And it is, it's torture. I mean, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's really miserable. People think when they're like, oh, 10 days sounds like a vacation, just get away from it all. But it's miserable because you're sitting there with your voice in your head barking at you and bringing up all kinds of old memories of regrets and fears and anxieties. And, you're sitting there thinking about sex and Oreos and video games and all the things you want to do, but you can't, right? So it's just, but you get face to face with your mind, which is where your suffering is created. Um, And in the midst of these experiences, you have these moments of just dropping into real acceptance of, oh, this is how it is right now. And that's okay. Where you're not craving for things to be other than they are. You're just, oh, this is how it is. And that's okay. And that is a state of deep inner peace and unconditional freedom, where you're not putting your happiness as, I need to have this deep spiritual experience in order to be happy. I need to have bliss. I need to have pleasure. I need to have a comfy bed to sleep on. It's just, oh, right now as it is okay. And that's deep peace.
Mhm. Yeah, my definition of sobriety is the degree to which you can be with reality or whatever is occurring without needing it to change.
That's it. I mean, that's exactly it. It's like when we're not in that, we have this feeling like I need things to be other than they are. I need something else in order to be happy. And that's addiction. And that's, like getting back to the nuances of this. It's like, okay, well, how do we enjoy our lives? It's like you can still enjoy things. You can still enjoy a strawberry cheesecake and say, wow, I love the taste of this. I'm enjoying this. But it's when you become dependent on that thing and you think, I need this strawberry cheesecake. And if I don't get it, I can't be happy. That's addiction.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's so important to point out because, for instance, food, like I consider myself like a pretty clean eater these days. I try to eat organic, non-GMO, fresh fruits and vegetables for the most part, but I'll enjoy some, like I got some downstairs right now. I got some coconut cream, mint chip ice cream, right? And
Uh-huh.
I justify it, it's organic. It's got the raw coconut sugar. I can, uh, I justify it like that in my own mind. But my point is, it's not a problem because today, if you were like, George, actually, like, I took the ice cream out of your freezer, you didn't even know, like, I came over and took it out. And when you go downstairs, it's not going to be there. Like, I'm not going to suffer,
Hmm.
right? There's still like fulfillment cultivated in the background of my awareness, right? Even though I don't get to have the ice cream. And that's because, again, it goes back to we want to be cultivating that internal sense of fulfillment independent of external circumstances, right? And when you have that, I had that this year because I think we have it, right? And I think we do. And then like there's always layers, there's levels to this, right? And so
Hmm.
and then it's like we see when we experience one of those new levels, like how stabilized is this experience, right? And so in the Vedic meditation training, we talk about how the bliss from our meditation rises up to meet us in our eyes open state. So we start to stabilize that experience in our eyes open state. So one day we come out of meditation, and it's almost like we just didn't come out, right? There's still that background
Mm.
sense of contentment there. But then you get to really see based on what happens in your life, like how well has that been established or is that stabilized inside of my awareness? Like I went through a divorce this year where,
Mm.
with my best friend and we're still best friends and, uh, there's so much for me to learn in that experience. And through meditation, I was able to import the question, what can I learn from this? So I didn't have to keep inviting back in a bigger situation until I got the lesson. But, I had never, when I got into this relationship, I was 4 months sober. And so I'd been in that relationship up until now. I'm 13 years sober. And so I had never really experienced my life as a meditator because I met her and then I learned to meditate at like 8 months sober. And so I never had experienced my life without a relationship, and got to see like without a relationship, do I still have a background sense of contentment on the inside? Because
Mm.
that was always the thing that it was like, I remember before I got sober from drugs and alcohol, I'd be in a relationship and the relationship would go away. And because my happiness was so dependent on it, I'd just go get high again because I couldn't deal with the pain I felt inside because there was no contentment or fulfillment that had been stabilized inside of me at that point.
Mm. Yeah. Beautiful. I mean, it really is about cultivating those qualities within and not just letting them be passing moments or fleeting moments, but kind of, there's this great book called Altered States, Altered Traits. And it's a group of researchers that study kind of the neuroscience and the benefits of meditation, I think out of the University of Wisconsin. But, there's things that produce altered states that are temporary. You take a drug, it's an altered state. But an altered trait is when it becomes who we are. We walk around with that sense of that inner glow or that contentment or the inner peace. And that's really the goal of this, is not to just have a fleeting moment, but to fundamentally change kind of the nature of how we're interacting with our world.
I've never heard that. That's a beautiful way of putting it, the altered states. And it's like, yeah, altered states are good, but how do we stabilize that experience so it becomes an altered trait?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. You got some
Yeah.
good stuff.
It's a great book, for anyone out there. It really looks into the science of kind of the benefits of meditation and how it can actually lead to altered traits.
Okay. And so with the porn stuff, because I watched, I don't know, you have some sort of free video where it's like a 3 steps or whatever that you tell people, right? That
Mm,
can be helpful for them when, embarking on this journey from porn addiction. And I'd
hmm
just love for you to maybe, if somebody's listening and, I think this is definitely a topic there's a lot of shame around, right? And then that shame keeps us just sick,
Yeah.
because we're not willing to even admit this thing might not be what do you call it? A unskillful.
Yeah. Unhealthy behavior, unskillful coping mechanism. I mean,
Yeah,
so many
unskillful. I
ways to
like that
describe it.
because there's no like judgment. It's just like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's not as skillful as how I'm showing up when I'm not, living in this way. And so,
Yeah.
just what that process looks like if somebody maybe it's not even porn, they're just noticing there's an unskillful behavior, but some of those steps that people can take right away to start to change
Mm,
the experience that they're having.
yeah. I mean, probably especially for porn, but for any kind of addiction where there is some shame around it. And porn is one of those where shame is really strong. For whatever reason, sexuality is one that is very sensitive for us as human beings. Like, we're okay talking about, hey, I'm a recovering alcoholic and I'm so proud of myself. But to say I'm a recovering sex addict feels different. We don't want people to know. And so there is a lot of shame. And because of that, one of the most important things you can do if you're struggling with this is to get connected, to join a men's group, to join a community. I run an online community around this, to get connected with a therapist or coach who understands, someone who you actually feel a sense of safety around this topic. Because a lot of the guys I work with, they've talked about how they've had therapists that just, they don't get it. Therapists that don't understand what they're going through or dismiss it and say, oh, that's not a big deal. Like, just go watch porn. Who cares? And so joining a men's group where people understand, and it, undoubtedly, if you're in a men's group, guys will understand. I mean, this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but so many guys struggle with kind of an unhealthy relationship with porn, where it feels like, I know this isn't quite good for me, but I watch more than I should, and I don't really know how to stop, or I'm watching stuff that doesn't really feel aligned with my values. So getting connected is probably the most important thing you can do. One of the other benefits of it is that it gives you real accountability. If you are joining that kind of a community, it's very hard to practice recovery on your own, especially for an addiction like porn, which is very isolated. It's one that causes a lot of hiding and lying and secretive behavior. It's very hard to recover on your own. And so having a community where you can have a safe space to talk about what you're going through, or when you slip up, where you can have the guys in the community say, hey, don't worry about it, dust yourself off, get back on track, is so incredibly valuable. I would say it's the most important thing you can do is get connected.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think another part of getting connected is like when you surround yourself with other people. I think one of the things that starts to happen is you start to see to believe that the things you want in your own life are possible. And that inspires you, right?
hmm
To take more inspired action.
hmm Totally. I mean, I tell the guys in my community this all the time. Even if you have nothing to say and you don't need any support, just show up to the call, because listening to what the other guys are going through, listening to their struggles and their successes is so helpful. You learn so much about yourself when you see someone else talking about the same struggle. If you're struggling with something in silence and you think, I'm the only one, I don't know how to deal with this, I feel so lost and hopeless. And then you get on a call and you see some other guy saying the exact thing that you're struggling with. And he's like, I'm struggling with this and I just don't know what to do. And here's some things I've tried. Just that alone makes it like heals a lot of the shame. And it gives you hope that like, oh, I'm not alone. And then when you hear guys talking about their successes, when you hear a guy who's been struggling to get to the gym say, I've finally committed and I've gone to the gym, you know, every day for the last 7 days. I've gotten up early. I'm eating healthy. I'm feeling energized. It gives you energy to do the same. Like, oh, if he can do it, maybe I can do it too. So there is so much of this synergistic effect of being around people who are intentional about creating a better life for themselves.
Absolutely. I love too what you were talking about, like just in your group, just being able to feel like when you share what's going on with you, that somebody else gets it, has been through it. And it's just the weight that, you know, is able to take off of your shoulders when you have that experience with someone else. Like I had that experience today with a coaching client. They've been sober a long time from drugs and alcohol, and they have some things. Some of them related to sex, right? Where gone out with a prostitute a couple times, and just a lot of shame and guilt around that, and some other sex stuff. A lot of which I can relate to, and I've had the same experiences, right? And it was like, and for them to be able to be like, hear me say, yeah, like I went through those same things, like totally understand that. No, no judgment at all. Like it doesn't mean, I think a lot of times people who went through drug and alcohol addiction, because it's such a life or death errand, especially like me, I was addicted to heroin. By the time I was 18, I was a full blown IV drug user. And so it was like, I was going to fucking die. Like, I
Mm.
couldn't get a needle out of my arm. And so then we take the life and death sort of mentality and we put it on top of these things, right? And then it becomes the lens through which we view any of our shortcomings, right? And it's like reality is like you're human, right? I heard somebody say recently, he said, if you've met a man who hasn't failed, you haven't met a man at all. And it's
Mm.
like, it's like, how do we learn how to get back up? We learn by falling down, right? And just to normalize these things, again, it's not saying that we're saying it's okay or, like you said, we don't want to take it to the extreme of like, well, it really doesn't matter what I do. It's just like, it's also helpful. Yeah, it's unskillful. Maybe I want to learn how to take more aligned action, I guess would be the word that
Mm.
resonates with me. But at the same time, to know like, I can let go of some of that shame around this because I'm not the only person who's been through this experience before.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a weight off your shoulder to realize you're not the only one.
Yeah. That's awesome. So you have a community where
Mm.
you're helping people. And so what does that look like? It's a coaching program, and then people are part of your community who are part of your coaching program. Is that how that works?
Yeah. I mean, at its core, it's like an online men's group. We meet every week. It's primarily focused around guys who are recovering from some kind of sex or porn addiction. Every guy's at a different place in his journey. Some are years sober, and some are kind of still in the early stages. Um, but it's just a chance to connect, to check in, to be real. Like especially as us guys, we need places where we can connect with other men and be real with each other and say, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. Uh, I'm struggling with this in my relationship. I don't know how to have this conversation with my wife. This is what I'm struggling with in my eating. I keep dipping into this bad habit, whatever it is. It's a place to get accountability and to just let yourself be seen. Again, that's so important. And I think especially for men, we need that more than ever. Like women, it's great. There's so many like women's circles and women's retreats, and women have a lot of places where they can go and get emotional support. But for men, those spaces are few and far between. And it's why,
But why
these
is
men's
that?
groups, there's a lot of, societal reasons why that has been kind of, um, less prevalent. Guys are also a bit more ashamed of some of these things, or there's so many societal reasons why these things have been repressed. But I think in the past 5 years, there's been kind of a resurgence, a realization that men need men, and men need spaces where they can connect with other men and talk about emotions, and that it's not good enough to just do it in the context of therapy. It's like we need men's spaces as well. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. Beautiful. As far as like your journey goes, just to sort of, tie up that piece of this is what would you say throughout that whole journey, the biggest obstacle that you've had to overcome is?
Mm. Oh, that's a great question. There's so many things that are like coming to me. I don't know if there's one biggest one, but one thing that's coming to mind right now is just the little ways that the addictive habit can sneak back in through the back door and go unnoticed, and can manifest in different ways. And you really just have to be aware, of the ways that things slowly creep back in. And sometimes it creeps back in and kind of comes back in the same flavor of, oh, okay, I was addicted to porn and now I'm addicted to dating apps, or now I'm addicted to sex. It can come in different flavors, like, oh, now I'm addicted to getting likes on social media and checking my follower count. It's like the biggest obstacle is realizing that the path never ends. The journey, it's not like you get to this destination where, okay, I'm totally unshackled and just a totally enlightened being that has attained nirvana. It's like, no, it's like, okay, I'm a human being. And as long as I'm alive, like these things can still hook themselves into me, whether it's junk food, external validation, finances, sex, whatever it is. It's like to be aware of that. Ego can also be a big obstacle, thinking, oh, I should have figured this out by now, or oh, I don't need to do this anymore because I've done the work already. There's so many ways that ego inflation and wanting to puff ourselves up. So those are some of the things that come to mind of some of the big obstacles. But yeah, I would say society, the way that the moneyed interest in society, the billions of dollars from the sugar industry, the porn industry, the accessories industry, everything kind of eats into your soul and says, I know you want me. I know you want this bacon cheeseburger. I know you want this fancy watch. I know you want this sexy girl, whatever it is. It's very compelling. It's tantalizing. And we really need to be, one of the metaphors of mindfulness is like to be a watcher at the gate of your city, to
At the
have a
gate of your what?
sentinel, your city. It's like if you have a city, to have a gate at the city and to have a guard there that's kind of watching what's coming in. Because if you're just totally not aware and just let anything come in, our society will plant itself into you and convince you that you need all these external things to be happy.
Mm.
And it takes a level of diligence and mindfulness and heedfulness to kind of say, let me be cognizant and live an intentional life and think about what I'm letting get planted into my brain.
Yeah, and it sort of reminds me of just becoming more intentional, like you said, and just more of a conscious choice maker,
Hmm.
right? And having more of that self-awareness where there's that space in your awareness now, in between the time something's trying to enter into your city, if I use your language, and between the time like you notice it, so it's not just happening and it's not just, you know, going on without you really having the opportunity to choose whether this is something you want to let in or not. And
Yeah,
meditation helps to create that space, I think, where we can pause and we can say, hold on a sec. What are the consequences of me letting this thing into my city? And how is this
yeah,
choice going to affect me and everybody else involved? And then from that more informed place, make a conscious choice as to whether or not I want to allow that thing in.
exactly. I mean, there's that famous quote, it's misattributed to Viktor Frankl, but it says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response lies your growth and your freedom. And that is so powerful. It's like between stimulus, attractive girl walks by, stimulus, junk food on the screen, stimulus. Between that stimulus and your response is a space. But if there's no space, you're just reactive. You see something pleasant, you reach for it, right? That's reactivity. But if, as you say, if you can gain access to that space, it gives you the power to choose how to respond. And all of your growth and all of your freedom and all of your ability to be a human is in your ability to choose how to respond. That's everything. Because otherwise, you're just a robot acting on your habit patterns and your impulses.
Mm.
Your ability to grow and have freedom, all of it lies in that space between stimulus and response.
What do you think about, we can end around here, but I'm just like thinking what you've been saying these last few minutes is amazing. And one of the things I was thinking about was the movie The Matrix, and like unplugging ourselves from the Matrix, and that idea too. Like, I don't know if have you seen The Matrix, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's that scene where, Neo is walking with Morpheus and there's through the simulator or whatever, and the girl in the red dress walks by. And right before that scene, he says something to Neo where he says, Neo, you have to understand that most of these people don't want to be unplugged.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, and that's the thing is, it's not even, I don't think that people don't want to. I think that there's like a society that's like you said, it's got all these money and resources aimed at keeping you sort of like not having, as you're saying, like the choice over what you're letting into your city. And so it's like, how can you just, because it's like things are happening almost automatically, right? Where we're just reacting to them. And so how do we slow it down enough is what I'm hearing you say, to be able to start to choose, right, what I'm letting in and the programming that
Yeah.
I'm allowing into the software of my mind.
Yeah. Well, and this is where, we almost should have started here, because I don't want to open up a whole nother rabbit hole. We could go another hour, but awareness is so essential. Like the awareness, the understanding of what is this leading to? Is this junk food? Is this porn actually making me happy? Most people never slow down enough to even ask that question. But when you actually look at it and say, okay, because that was the turning point for me, I realized I had had so much sex. I had watched so much porn. I had eaten so much good food. And I asked the question, like, I've gotten kind of everything I've wanted, and I'm not happy. So something about this strategy must be broken.
Mm.
And so a great question to ask is like, to what end? Like, okay, I wanna watch porn. It's gonna bring me pleasure, but to what end? Like, what am I foreseeing is the end goal here? Do I really think that, when I finish watching porn, that I'm gonna feel deeply fulfilled in a state of kind of happiness and content with my life? A lot of times we're just thinking too short term, like, well, it's going to make me feel good in the next moment, so therefore I'll do it. But we don't think, is this going to lead to a happier life?
It's the short-term relief, but a lot of those things that give us the short-term relief often lead us with those more long-term lasting consequences.
Exactly.
Right? Because look,
Yeah.
if watching porn was going to lead to the fulfillment that we sought, there'd be a lot more fucking fulfilled people in the world.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole world would be walking around with a state of like bliss and contentment, but it just doesn't work,
100%. Yeah, man. Well, maybe that's what we'll do. Maybe we'll have you on for a part two. We can get more into the Buddhism stuff, the awareness, and have a whole nother hour conversation. I'm super grateful to have you on the show, and you're a very good speaker, and you have a lot of valuable knowledge. And I think that this conversation will really be helpful for the listeners. So I want to thank you for your time and your willingness to be vulnerable and share with everybody on the show today.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It's really been a joy to kind of dive into this, especially with someone, who really gets the meditation thing. And appreciates that side of it. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'll say my formal goodbye in a minute, but thanks again.